Have you ever played a game and got that feeling in your gut this was the one? Where everything, from the gameplay to the music to the graphics to the design, was just custom tailored to you. Everything just clicks together like a Swiss clock. I sure have. This particular love affair started in 1997 on the PlayStation 1. Tecmo, the Ninja Gaiden, Dead or Alive, Fatal Frame guys, decided to create the masterpiece known as Monster Rancher. Taken as a whole, the Monster Rancher franchise embraces over 20 different games across a half-dozen different consoles and a 3-season-long anime series. That's not even counting stuff that never left Japan, including an MMORPG and several spin-offs. Primarily, it's a series of life sim monster games with extremely complex engines under the hood. Monster Rancher provides a series of challenging and unique experiences with every installment. And in the event it wasn't already clear, I love Monster Rancher, both the individual game and the series as a whole. This simple series of videos will be dedicated to talking about what Monster Rancher is and why you should love it too. To kick it off, we start at the beginning. First in a long line of life sim RPGs, Monster Rancher hit the scene with gameplay unseen since, if we're being perfectly honest, since Princess Maker, but Monster Rancher took advantage of the PS1's unique hardware feature. It could hot swap CDs without cutting power to the console, and then record a short band of information off them, be they fellow PS1 titles, music, or PC game discs, then pop the game disc back in and generate a monster of your very own. Even in the instances when two different discs birth the same monster type, the player could still expect to see variances in starting stats, attacks, and other nuances, meaning that each disc was truly home to its own monster. Frankly, the advertising worked itself out. Promises of a monster locked away in every CD you owned, propelled by the natural boom and the popularity of the medium in the late 90s, it all went together like bread and butter. As a quick bit of trivia and an opportunity to clarify for those who might be confused, the game released in Europe and Australia named Monster Rancher is actually the sequel game, 1999's Monster Rancher 2, which I'll cover next time. The first Monster Rancher title was never released in PAL regions. However, after Monster Rancher 2, the numbering became consistent worldwide. Rather than a collection-based focus, Monster Rancher's primary gameplay hinges on focusing all of your efforts on a single monster at a time. Sure, there's an encyclopedia you can fill in by getting more monsters, but that's not the real reason you're here. Once you find one you like from your CD collection, you take it home to your ranch. There, you assign your monster jobs, which double as petty cash earners, and ways to build your monster's stats: power, intelligence, speed, skill, defense, and HP. Your goal is to feed and care for your monster, balancing its fatigue, needs, and stress by assigning it, on a weekly basis, work to perform, times to rest, and the real highlights, battles and expeditions. Every in-game week acts as a turn, with 4 weeks to a month and 12 months to a year, as you might have guessed. All the while, you operate under the very real assumption that time is both precious and limited, as monsters live only a few in-game years before the harsh reality of death will take its toll. Yeah, it's a real till death or I otherwise need to pop you in the fridge for a while, do us part kind of sentiment. So your responsibilities as rancher are to raise funds, buy and find useful items, expand your ranch, allowing you to store more items and house progressively larger monsters, and above all else, raise your monster to the best of your ability. And this won't be an easy task. The game is challenging and the tutorials aren't the best, but let's break that down a little. Real quick, let's start by talking about the game's aesthetics. I can actually stop myself from fanboying long enough to get the segment into a fairly condensed paragraph. First of all, the game looks great in that early PS1 kind of way. The designers clearly knew what their limits were and took advantage of them. The polys look really good, as do the textures. The translucent monster gel, for instance, really looks like it's made out of water, and you can see its red core in the center of mass. That is a great effect. The overall design leans on the slightly cartoonish, with some attacks being these huge, Looney Tunes-style effects that squash and stretch out enemy monsters on impact. It keeps the tone pretty lighthearted, even in the midst of a hectic battle. And the music, while simple in its composition, is incredibly pleasing. At no point did I feel the need to mute it, despite the fact that players can't expect to hear the same songs on loop an awful lot. They're mostly in the sort of marching band kind of music. My lack of familiarity with music terms aside, it looks great and it sounds pretty solid too. Now, let's dig into the real fish and potatoes of the game, the gameplay. Do you get it? Because you feed your monster each month fish and... You know what, never mind. Let's just move on. You start with your monster fresh off the disc and start raising. However, you need to bear in mind that monsters, just like people, will grow through phases, including that awkward infancy stage. Early on, monsters fail their tasks a lot, You'll also probably notice that certain monsters have particular temperaments, like how Suezos are lazy and prone to slacking, or tigers are quick to grow in loyalty to their masters. I suppose it's important to mention that Monster Rancher also uses a simple hybrid genome system. That sounds complicated, but what that means is a species will be read as a simple mixture of two monsters' DNA. A purebred pixie will be read as pixie/pixie, and a mint would be read as pixie/tiger. This, among most of the game's mechanics, are a bit too deep to explain in this short of a video. Really, each monster has their own personality, and that's just one of the many things I love about this game. As they grow, you may even find aspects of their demeanor will change as they grow, well into their primes and their best stat growths, eventually gaining stat points much faster and rarely if ever failing at their jobs. However, a big part of this is learning what your monster really excels at. And sometimes this is obvious, like as is the case with a monster known as Golem. It's a massive rock man. Golems specialize in strength and defense. Others are not as obvious, and it will require you to experiment with different jobs to see what kind of gains you can expect from each. Some monsters, like the aforementioned tiger, and yeah, I know, it doesn't look like a tiger, roll with it, are flexible and have attack lists that let them excel in numerous sorts of builds. And it isn't just main breeds that matter. A plant with a mono subtype will have better defense gains than a regular purebred plant, and so on. Learning this is a huge part of the appeal, and seeing what does and doesn't work. Once you get better at recognizing those sorts of patterns, you'll find yourself raising monsters that have consistent and strong stat growths, and then eventually acing the month-long heavy training known as training. This is when you know it's time to enter the monster battle. Battles are one of the game's many highlight reels, really going head-to-head against the game's innumerable challengers across regular tournaments and official tournaments. Those are the ones that raise your monsters and ranch rank if you come in first place. The vast majority of tournaments happen in round-robin fashion, where every monster battles every opponent once, and the best win-loss ratio takes the crown and any applicable prizes. As you and your monster rise up the ranks and grow in fame, you'll accept greater challenges, eventually being invited to battle to unlock rare monster breeds, like the mighty dragon. Who doesn't want a pet dragon? Starting from the humble beginner's rank of E, you must climb up the alphabet to come out on top of the S rank. You know, that's how the alphabet goes. S, A, B, C. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. However, simply crushing your opponent underfoot isn't all you'll be doing. At some point, the enigmatic Mr. Karn stops by your ranch, looking for a monster to aid in expeditions, 3 unique maps that you can explore, which will rotate as the year rolls by. You'll be invited each time the proper month arrives, provided your monster's a high enough rank. Expeditions are just another amazing aspect, wherein you can find items and unlock additional monster breeds, like the elusive Hinger. Different monster stats are applied in various clever ways, like using power to remove a toppled stone pillar, or intelligence to tackle a swarm of insects blocking the path. Skill and intelligence, I believe, are used in finding items from temples and ruins of a civilization all but lost to time. In fact, as you find items and unlock monster breeds in doing those events, you'll learn some facts about the world and the ancient civilization. For example, you can find 3 ancient statues of deities from that time: Bragma, Philaria, and Gatamon. More on them later, just hold on to that tidbit for now. Downsides to expeditions? Well, you'll get lost a lot. Not you getting lost, but your monster. More than I feel like it should happen, your monster will get lost and you'll be without for a couple of weeks before it finds its way home, exhausted from the ordeal. That's kind of why save scumming is a major element of the gameplay. As an aside, I read somewhere that eventually the obstacles in the expedition maps reset. I've literally never seen this happen, and on my personal save file, I have played the first game for over 100 in-game years. And no, that doesn't make me weird. So, in between battling for glory and glorious amounts of cash and expeditioning for more of the same, you deal with some semi-random events on your homestead. While most weeks will happen in semi-predictable fashion, especially as you get to learn your monster's tendencies, sometimes events can happen that shake up the course of training. A famous monster, for example, might receive fan mail, or an overly exhausted monster who was knocked out in a brutal match might end up in the hospital from its injuries for a number of weeks as it recovers. As you proceed into the game and try new things, you'll experience all the more. This can lead to some really cool moments that really add to immersion. A monster who loves and respects their breeder may bring them free items. Nothing game-breaking, obviously, but they'll make little offerings to their boss. Further, a willful monster might test their boundaries by making requests for items for themselves, which the player can then weigh in on by either giving them a treat or denying it. But eventually, your up-and-comer is going to get old, and you, as the rancher, will be forced to make some tough choices. Sure, you could let their lifespan run its course, but Monster Rancher is a merciful game. This gives your player some options. It's time to discuss another series staple, Monster Fusion. In town, you might have noticed there's a monster lab, wherein monsters can be stored in cryostasis. Monsters can be frozen and thawed out an infinite number of times to no ill effect, and how that works is beyond me. But what matters is this. 2 frozen monsters can be fused together into a new monster. You simply suggest who you want the main monster of the fusion to be, and then a secondary monster to fuse with it. Sometimes you'll use items, but more on that another time. I recommend you save before you do this, as the fusion result is semi-random, and the resulting combinations may not make immediate sense to those not familiar with how the system works. However, the truly beautiful thing is that fusion is so much more than a mere additional monster generation method. 2 well-trained monsters with high stats and lots of attacks will yield a resulting fused monster with higher than average stats, probably more attacks than a fresh unlock, and can be means of unlocking breeds that you may not have a disc on hand for. That's the beauty of Monster Rancher. The game never actually ends. You can get a credit scroll for beating the last tournament in S-Rank, sure, but that's not so much an ending, so much as one of many goals to shoot for while you discover your own ranching style and favorite breeds. To tell just one story of many from my personal playtime was my pixie/dino named Paula. Don't ask me why, I don't remember if there was even a reason for that name. But being early in my playtime in the game and not really understanding how subbreeds influence stat growth, and I was just terrible at the game, I tried to raise all 6 of her stats evenly, and this sort of worked, being she was my first monster to break into the B rank with all stats all between 350 and 400, out of a max of 999 for those who are curious. Then she got into her twilight years, and I had no choice but to freeze her or risk losing all that progress. She actually stayed frozen for a long time, both in-game and in real time. I didn't want to lose all that effort I put into her, and I was really proud of that B rank. But later on, as I came to understand the game better and learned to raise progressively better monsters, I eventually fused her with a galley to make a monster known as Angel, who would eventually win it all for me in the final S-Rank tournaments. All because I learned how to prioritize my training methods for each individual monster's needs, and about what subtypes would best emphasize those methods. As a whole, Monster Rancher 1 was a humble beginning that still has countless hundreds of hours of game time awaiting those who really want to dig in and have an experience with an amazing Life Sim Mons game. There are so many different breeds to try, 20 main ones, and that's not even counting the fusions. Different ranching methods are available and different strategies to try. I have barely scratched the surface of all the secrets and goodies awaiting the patient ranchers who go in with an open mind. That's just it, though. This game and its series is really ill understood. No one's really certain how most of the calculations are handled, and the coding in most of the games is labyrinthine and terrifyingly complex. I could go into greater depth about raising strategies or different archetype stat growth, individual monster lifespan phases, risks and rewards in expeditions, options during fusion, but if I did that, this video would literally run hours, and I wouldn't even be getting into the complexities that the sequels and spin-offs eventually add. Monster Rancher on the PS1 is an underrated classic that absolutely deserves another look. It is so much more than a Pokemon clone, as some will write it off as, and have. In fact, calling it that shows the profound lack of understanding of the series, but that's a rant for another time. This has been the Hipster Snek, and if you enjoyed this first part into our in-depth look into the Monster Rancher series, please be sure to hit that like button to show your support. And if you haven't yet, be sure to click subscribe and the bell icon so you always know when another review comes down the pipeline. And lastly, let me know what you think in the comments below. Undoubtedly, more is yet to come. Join me here next time as I delve into the sequel, Monster Rancher 2, and the 3-season anime series, as we see how the franchise really began to grow and develop its cult following. And I'll see you there.